want to talk about one habit I started a few years ago that has really improved my painting skills. It's helped me understand my subject better. It's helped me with compositions, colour choices, problem solving, and it's helped me practice my technique. I recently painted a yellow-tailed black cockatoo. These guys are beautiful big birds. This is one I videoed in our garden recently, and we love it when they visit. They have a really mournful call. Okay, so the one thing that has really helped me improve my painting skills is doing studies. And I've talked about this before. Before I completed this painting, I did a few studies first. I had hoped that I would only need to do one study, but the first study didn't work out the way I wanted it, and I abandoned it. I ended up attempting it 2 more times before I had success with my 4th painting. These 2 weren't meant to be studies, but because I struggled with both of them, that's what they ended up being. I don't always do studies, but I credit them with improvement in my skills. I will do a study if I'm unsure of the subject or if I want to experiment. Maybe I want to play around with the background, for example. If I'm confident and I know exactly where I'm headed with the subject, I won't bother with the study. The studies that I do are serious attempts. They're not warm-up exercises because I figure if the study works out really well, I can sell it. I'm going to show you how the studies I did of this black cockatoo informed the final painting I did. The mistakes I made on the studies allowed me to progress towards a painting that I was pleased with. This was the first study. I didn't even finish this one because I knew there was no point. I thought I'd include some of the Banksia leaves, but without thinking about their placement, I ended up with 3 little disjointed patches of leaves that looked strange, and they detracted from the cockatoo. There was no point to them, so I decided to leave them off altogether. The second thing I learned with this one was to not use masking fluid. I chose to use masking fluid on the light yellow tips of the wing feathers because I knew I wanted to wash the feathers in all at once. I used an old thin liner brush to apply the masking fluid. I wanted to try and keep the highlighted area as thin as I could. So I painted it on slowly and carefully. I try to avoid using masking fluid because whenever I use it, the highlights that are left behind tend to look unnatural. No matter how careful I am applying it, I'm rarely happy with the highlighted areas that it leaves behind. So if I can find a way to not have to use it, I will. When I finished washing in the feathers, I removed the masking fluid and I was left with these thick highlighted edges that just didn't look right. So then I had to get some white gouache out and do a bit of fixing up. So I knew on my next painting, I would skip the masking fluid. So then I painted this second one and I wanted to be a bit bolder with the background. With this one, instead of using masking fluid on the tips of the feathers, I used some gouache, and I felt that that worked better than the masking fluid. Let's have a quick look at the start of it. I mixed a dark colour from French ultramarine and transparent sienna. I like to use freshly squeezed pigment when I mix dark colours because I can mix the fresh pigment with very little water in my brush, and that helps me to keep the mixture fairly dark. Once I get the colour I want, then I can add a small amount of water so that it will flow off my brush and onto the paper. These are Schminker paints that I'm using. I like to mix black because I can adjust the temperature of it. Pre-mixed black straight out of the tube tends to look lifeless. When I mix it like this, I can add more blue if I want it to be a cool black, or more of the sienna if I want it to be a warm black. I made the mistake on this painting of making the mixture a bit too blue though. I overdid it with the French ultramarine. I did a quick test on some scrap paper before I touched my painting, and then I made some adjustments. I wet the paper before I started, and I thought I'd wash in the body and the background all at once. I've got my board on an angle because I wanted the paint to flow down to the bottom of the paper. There's a large book propping it up. I used some transparent yellow on the cheek feather area and I let the paint flow down the paper. And I also did that on the yellow sections of the tail feathers. I thought it would be a good idea to wash in the background and the bird at the same time. So off I went with my large mop brush and my dark paint mixture. Here I'm trying not to lose the yellow cheek patch. I started to relax then and I tried to paint it on as loosely and as freely as I could. Once I got the colour on the bird, I started to wash some of it onto the background as well. Then I used a smaller brush and I started to paint on the head. And again, I was conscious of not losing the yellow cheek patch. So I painted around it as carefully as I could. I made sure my brush wasn't too wet. I painted in the crest feathers, and because the paper isn't as wet as it was when I started, the paint isn't spreading as far as it did. One reason I like working on the wet paper is because I love how the colours separate. I let the paper dry a little, then I laid it flat on the table and I dropped in some water to create some blooms. I wanted to try and break up the background wash and create some texture and interest. Okay, so everything is washed in on that first layer. I let it dry and then I started to build up the details. And I think this is where I came unstuck. I started to fuss with the paint, and whenever I do that, I know that it's not working. I have this beautiful book by Thomas Schaller. It's not only filled with his gorgeous paintings, it also has his essays that he's written about his journey as an artist. In chapter 6, he writes how sometimes when you're painting, you can get lost in the process and time seems to stand still. It can be almost magical. But sometimes it's not magical and we can wrestle with our paintings. Thomas says whenever he finds himself doing that, he knows he's gone off track. And that's what I felt happened to me with this painting. I was trying to get the paint dark enough because dark colours lift, and I didn't want to have to come back and put another layer on top of this layer. I dropped some water just here and it left a little circle on the paint. I should have left it alone and not worried about it, but I tried to fix it, and that was the start of me fussing. So I got my eradicator brush out and tried to form the shape of a feather there. That didn't really work, so I wet my large brush and tried to take a bit more paint off. That didn't work either, so then I got a bit more paint and tried to cover over it with a bit more paint. Then I tried to soften the edge of that with a damp brush, and I ended up lifting off more paint than I was putting on. So as I said, I should have left it alone. Another thing that I did wrong with this one was I felt that the wash I used on the feathers was a bit too blue. I must have used too much French ultramarine. So when I did the final painting, I toned that down a bit. Here I'm using gouache to paint on the edges of the feathers. This worked better than the masking fluid. I mixed some transparent yellow, that was the colour that I used on the cheek patch and the tail feathers, and I mixed it with some white gouache. So that was number 2. The next day I thought I'd try again, and I was hoping that this one would be the final painting. But I chose the wrong paper. I painted on a piece of Fabriano Artistico cold press paper, which I love to use, but colours lift really easy on this paper, so it wasn't a good choice. Have a look at the mess that I got myself into. I mixed some more paint for myself and I painted that first wash in again on wet paper all at once. Now I went back to the head and I needed to add some more colour. So I wanted to work on wet paper to keep paint edges soft. And as soon as I re-wet this layer, even though it was completely dry, I could see the paint was starting to lift. I went ahead anyway and I started to darken some areas on the head. That layer dried and then I thought I needed to go a bit darker here on the top of the head. So this time I worked on dry paper thinking that would help, but it didn't. The paint kept lifting. I'm using a really soft brush and I'm really delicately touching the surface of the paper, but it just wasn't enough. The paint was lifting way too easily. Here I was trying to do a bit of repair work, and I knew at this stage that I was fighting a losing battle. So here I'm trying to do some repair work. I didn't like the way the wash had dried. So I tried to move the pigment around with my brush, but it just wasn't working. No matter what I did or how long I waited for it to dry, it just kept lifting. I gave up on that one as well, lesson learned. All right, so 3 paintings done. All of them had failed as far as I was concerned. Then I took what I learned from them and I tried again the next day. And this time, magic happened. With this one, I painted the background in first. I let that dry, and then I'll work on the cockatoo. I thought that's going to be easier for my students to follow along if I painted in stages. So once the background was dry, then I thought I'd wash in the head. So rather than try and wash in the head and the body all at once, I thought it would be easier to just wash in the head and focus on that. Then when the head was dry, I washed in the wing area. I made sure that my colour mixture wasn't as blue as it was on that second study that I did. And I was much happier with this colour. I washed in the tail, I added some detail on the wings, and then because I knew not to use masking fluid on the tips of the feathers, I mixed some yellow into my white gouache and I painted the tips of the feathers with this. And that worked much better than using the masking fluid. So the 3 paintings I did before informed all of the choices that I made with this one. And here it is finished. I keep harping on about this because it's important. I know that it's frustrating and you start to doubt yourself when painting after painting fails. Let that frustration go and focus on how valuable those failures are. Learn from them. Have another go tomorrow. Tomorrow you might fail again. That's okay. Keep going, because if you put the work in, eventually you will succeed. Persist. If you'd like to try painting this yourself, I have an online tutorial where I walk you through it step by step. Prints of this painting are available on my website. When you order a print, we donate to one tree planted so that a tree will get planted within Australia. I need to mention as well, you know that I have classes on Patreon where you can pay a subscription to have access to them. Well, I recently opened the Louise Damassi Art School where you can purchase individual classes and have lifetime access to them. Whether you're starting your watercolour journey or looking to refine your techniques, these classes are designed to inspire and guide you step by step. Head to my website to find out more. I've linked to it in the description of the video. I'm also excited to introduce my new line of merchandise. The collection includes t-shirts, hoodies, mugs, and a cute embroidered apron. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Then I've got a hair hanging down the back of my neck again. I hate it when that happens. Start again. I will do a study. I'm having trouble today. I thought I'd include what I felt. No, you heard what he said, but yeah.
No, I can't hear you from you.
Yes, you can.
Not very well. No, you can't.
Dom asked me to say magic happened.
You didn't say that with a smile.
Dom asked me to say magic happened.
No, that looks smiley.
Dom asked me to say magic happened.